So now we're going to talk about the glands and disorders associated with the endocrine system. Now, the major endocrine organs we've already discussed: pituitary gland, thyroid gland, etc., etc. And in the previous presentation, I noted that you needed to memorize these glands and the hormones that they produced. And again, as you can see, these glands are widely scattered. They produce hormones that will impact tissues that are far away from them, and it will only impact tissues that have specific receptors for the hormone that is being introduced. So the first gland that we're going to talk about is the pituitary gland. It's about the size of a pea, and it hangs by a stalk in the hypothalamus by a structure called the infundibulum, although you don't need to know that. It is protected, well protected, by the sphenoid bone, and it has two functional lobes. It has the anterior pituitary, which is actual glandular tissue, and then the posterior pituitary, which has nervous tissue, which releases hormones, basically neurotransmitters, into that part of the gland for release later on. This is often called the master gland of the endocrine system. Now, there are 6 pituitary hormones in the anterior that we need to deal with. 2 affect non-endocrine related targets, that is, they will affect general tissues within the body. So growth hormone is one, prolactin is the other, and then we have 4 that stimulate endocrine glands. Anything that is a hormone that stimulates another gland is a tropic hormone. And for that, we have thyroid stimulating hormone, or thyrotropic hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and 2 gonadotropic hormones. Gonadotropic just means that they work on the gonads, like the testes or the ovaries. Now, characteristics of all anterior pituitary hormones is that they are proteins or peptides, and that makes them water soluble, and they use the second messenger system that we discussed in our earlier presentation. They are regulated by hormonal stimuli, mostly, again, that negative feedback system that we discussed earlier. So here you can see just a graphic showing what the hormone is and what it works on. So growth hormone stimulates bone and muscle. Prolactin stimulates the mammary glands. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone work on the ovaries and testes, and so forth. First, we'll talk about the growth hormone. It's a general metabolic hormone, and it works on all sorts of tissues. It affects are directed toward the growth of the skeletal and muscle and long bones, and it plays a role in determining your final body size, whether you're tall, small, etc. What it does is it causes amino acids to be built into proteins. It causes fat to be broken down for a source of energy. So this gets released a lot, or a lot of this gets released during puberty. And you may have known a child who was relatively pudgy before puberty that suddenly bursts in growth, loses a lot of weight during puberty. So this burns up a lot of your body fat. Now, some growth hormone disorders that occur are pituitary dwarfism, which results when you have an insufficiency or hyposecretion of growth hormone during childhood. Gigantism results from hyper or excess of secretion during childhood. And then acromegaly results from hypersecretion of growth hormone as an adult. So here's an example of gigantism, which results from that hypersecretion. This is a normal-sized man here. This is one of the tallest people in the world, and he had a hypersecretion of the hormone during childhood before puberty. is when you have a hyposecretion, that is, you don't have enough of growth hormone during childhood. And there's mini-me as an example, also known as Vernon-Croyer. And acromegaly is what happens when you have excess growth hormone after puberty, after the growth plates have sealed. And what it does is it results in a general thickening of the tissues. So you get larger, thicker bones and larger muscles as a result. And here's a prime example. This was Andre the Giant. You may remember him from the movie The Princess Bride. Other hormones of the anterior pituitary include prolactin, which stimulates and maintains milk production following childbirth. It's made for males, but we really don't know what it does in males. We have adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, which regulates endocrine activity of the adrenal cortex. And then we have thyroid stimulating hormone, which influences growth and activity of the thyroid gland. We have the gonadotropic hormones, which regulate hormonal activity of the gonads, like follicle stimulating hormone, which causes the ovaries, the follicle to develop in the ovaries, and stimulates sperm development in the testes. And then we have luteinizing hormone, which triggers ovulation of eggs in females and stimulates testosterone production in males. Now, it is not unusual for some forms of male sterility to be a result of ample amounts of luteinizing hormone, but an insufficient quantity of follicle stimulating hormone. So a male could have the deep voice, the body hair, all of that sort of stuff, because the luteinizing hormone is present, but may have very little sperm production because there is insufficient follicle stimulating hormone. The pituitary and hypothalamus, their relationship to each other is that the hypothalamus regulates the activity of the pituitary. And hormonal release is regulated by releasing inhibiting hormones produced by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus produces two hormones, and these are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. The posterior pituitary then is not strictly an endocrine gland, but does release the hormones that are produced by the neurons that secrete into that tissue. Now, oxytocin stimulates contractions of the uterus during labor, also causes them contractions to occur during sexual relationships, and stimulates milk production from breastfeeding. It also causes milk ejection in nursing women. Interestingly, in a situation where a woman is pregnant but has not delivered child, there's artificial oxytocin called pertussin, which is administered, which will stimulate contractions. Now, the thyroid gland is found at the base of the throat, and it is two lobes, produces two hormones, which are thyroid hormone, which is a general regulator of metabolism, and then calcitonin, which is involved in calcium maintenance. So here's the thyroid gland in the neck, and you can see two lobes, one here, and a little isthmus that connects the two. Now, thyroid hormone is the major metabolic hormone. It consists of two active iodine-containing hormones, which are thyroxine, T4, which is secreted by the thyroid hormones, and triiodothyronine, which is T3, which gets converted to T4 at the target tissues. Now, there are some problems that can occur. We have these follicle cells which produce material, and then we have these follicles called colloid, or this substance called colloid, which gets stored. And if we don't have enough iodine in our diet to combine with the colloid, you get a swelling of that gland, which results in something called a goiter. The thyroid gland gets enlarged due to a lack of iodine. Now, this was a major problem, certainly up through the 1800s. I even had an aunt back in the 60s who had a goiter. They've started putting iodine in the salt, iodized salt, as a result, which, since most people get plenty of salt in their diet, they also get the iodine they need. So we don't see a goiter nearly as much. Now, if you don't have enough thyroxine prior to, or as a child, what results is dwarfism. And cretinism comes basically from the island of Crete. This was a condition that occurred there a great deal. So here's a child, and you can see that he has a goiter. Thyroid hormone disorders include something called myxedema, which is caused by hypothyroidism in adults. And it results in physical and mental sluggishness,